Did you watch the opening ceremony of the 2024 Paris Olympics? When the woman holding her own head while singing appeared, I thought it was one of the most remarkable moments of the entire ceremony. She is a queen with a rich history in France, Marie Antoinette. She was an Austrian princess, the Rose of Versailles, the icon of the Rococo style, the wife of Louis XVI, and the only queen in French history to be executed by the guillotine. She was only 38 years old that year. When mentioning Marie Antoinette, the beheaded queen of the Bourbon dynasty in France, many people's first impression is of a beautiful but ruinous queen who lived in extravagant luxury at the splendid Palace of Versailles while France's finances were on the verge of collapse, suggesting that people who couldn't afford bread should eat cake instead. After hearing this conclusion, one might conclude that Marie Antoinette's extravagant spending completely ruined France's finances and ultimately triggered the French Revolution. But is this really true? To argue that one person drained the French treasury and sparked one of the most profound revolutions in European history, we must at least examine these two basic facts. First, exactly how much did Queen Marie Antoinette spend during her tenure? Second, what were France's financial income and expenditures at that time, and what proportion of the expenditures was due to Marie's spending? None of the articles making these claims provide answers to these two questions, which is surprising. It shows how easy it is to smear someone without citing any basic facts and easily place the blame on her. Today, we will carefully examine this issue to see exactly how much Marie Antoinette spent from the French treasury during her tenure. Before the French Revolution, France's tax system was vastly different from that of modern nations. At that time, France lacked a centralized agency like a national tax administration to manage taxes uniformly across the country. Instead, the kingdom's taxes were outsourced to private tax farmers who collected taxes on behalf of the state. By the 18th century, this tax system had become highly outdated, inefficient, and prone to corruption. In pre-revolutionary France, taxes were divided into two types: direct and indirect taxes. Direct taxes were collected by royal officials from individuals. Indirect taxes, such as customs duties and consumption taxes, were collected by private tax farmers. By the time of Louis XVI, indirect taxes collected by these private tax farmers accounted for more than half of the state's revenue. Tax farmers signed multi-year contracts with the state, promising to pay the king a fixed amount of tax each year, regardless of economic conditions. If conditions were favorable, they could earn a profit. If the economy declined, they would bear the risk. This system initially emerged because the king wanted to transfer some of the risk, but over the centuries, it became highly prone to corruption in practice. A portion of the taxes collected from the people often ended up in the pockets of the tax farmers, meaning the king did not actually receive the full amount of taxes collected. Another flaw in the French tax system was that the population was divided into three estates. The first estate was the clergy, the second estate was the nobility, and the third estate was the commoners. The third estate included everyone who was not a clergyman or noble, meaning that even the wealthiest bourgeois had the same limited rights as the lowest peasants. The vast majority of taxes in France, aside from certain poll taxes, fell on the third estate, while the clergy and nobility were privileged classes exempt from most taxes. This makes it clear where France's class conflicts lay. Simply put, the third estate paid 95% of the taxes, bearing the heaviest tax burdens and living in hardship, while the first and second estates were almost entirely exempt from tax burdens. Moreover, due to the corrupt tax system, the taxes paid by the people were often siphoned off at various levels and did not fully reach the king's treasury. The king was short on funds, the people suffered, and only the privileged classes lived comfortably. Some tax officials embezzled a large amount of money. This paints a picture of the class structure in France during the reign of Louis XVI. Although the French royal family did not itemize expenditures for individual members, they maintained detailed annual records of the kingdom's financial expenditures. This is known as the Compte Rendu au Roi, the king's annual financial report. For example, let's look at the French royal family's financial report for 1788, the year before the Revolution. From this balance sheet, it can be seen that in the year before the Revolution, the net national revenue was 210 million livres, while expenditures were over 370 million, resulting in a deficit of 160 million livres. The major expenditure items were loan interest and military expenses. Loan interest had two main components. One was the interest on the enormous national debt of 2 billion livres caused by continuous wars, particularly the American War of Independence, and the other was the interest on annual loans used to cover the fiscal deficit. Combined, these amounted to 140 million livres, about 37% of total expenditures. Military expenses, including the army, navy, and colonial costs, also totaled 140 million livres, accounting for another 37% of total expenditures. High interest payments and military expenses made up 74% of France's total expenditures, while the total royal expenditure was 31 million livres, accounting for only about 8% of the total. It's clear where France's money went each year. So does this 31 million livres in royal expenditure represent the personal spending of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette? The answer is no. After the Revolution in 1790, the French National Assembly published Louis XVI's private accounting books to disclose the royal expenditures. These private accounting books differ from the aforementioned balance sheet in that they primarily recorded the king's personal expenses but provided more detailed information on royal spending. Since each year's accounting book was decorated with red gilded leather, they came to be known as the Red Book of the King. According to the private accounting books of Louis XVI from May 19, 1774 to August 16, 1789, the total royal expenditure during Louis XVI's 15-year reign was approximately 228 million livres. Of this, the personal expenses of the king and queen amounted to only about 11.5 million livres. Note that Louis XVI's recorded private expenses do not equate to the royal expenditures in the balance sheet. The latter encompasses a broader range of categories. However, it is evident that during Louis XVI's reign, both the proportion of royal expenditures in total French financial expenditures and the proportion of Louis XVI and his wife's personal expenses in royal expenditures were much lower than commonly imagined. Document-based estimates suggest that Marie Antoinette's actual personal expenses during her time as queen, even at the highest estimate, were only around 10 million livres. This represented about 4.3% of the total royal expenditures, and within the context of France's annual financial expenditures of 300 to 400 million livres, this proportion is almost negligible. The underlying causes of the economic crisis during Louis XVI's reign were the endless wars and a deeply corrupt tax system. Beginning with the reign of Louis XIV, France continually expanded its territory through relentless wars to assert its dominance in Europe. After ascending to the throne, Louis XIV fought the War of Devolution, the Franco-Dutch War, the 9 Years' War, and the War of the Spanish Succession. Despite having a once-in-a-century economic genius like Colbert managing the economy, France still faced an economic crisis during the 9 Years' War. Due to the need to cover war expenses amounting to billions, Colbert's tax reforms became difficult to sustain. To address short-term economic difficulties, the quickest solution was private borrowing. During the 9 Years' War, Colbert had no choice but to return to borrowing. It should be noted that while borrowing can address immediate needs, it often results in the burden of rising annual interest payments. Regardless of whether a war is won or lost, the economic toll can last for decades. In the 1680s, after thorough reflection, Colbert was determined to tackle the chronic issues of the French tax system. Unfortunately, his life was cut short due to overwork, and he died while still in office. After his death, due to the incompetence of his successors, the French tax system saw no fundamental reforms. Louis XIV left behind a debt of billions upon his death, which nearly bankrupted France. Fortunately, Regent Philippe II, Duke of Orléans, stepped in. He appointed John Law to carry out British-style financial reforms. Although this eventually led to the Mississippi bubble, causing many wealthy nobles to go bankrupt overnight as a result of the stock market crash, it did resolve the national debt crisis in France. In simple terms, the regent extorted a group of wealthy individuals, using coercion to transfer money from private pockets to the French treasury. However, the chronic issues of France's tax system persisted. If the king refrained from starting wars, financial problems would not have been a concern. Unfortunately, under Louis XV, France engaged in the War of the Austrian Succession, followed by the 7 Years' War. The 7 Years' War, in particular, almost completely drained the French treasury. When Louis XVI took the throne, France's national debt stood at 2.5 billion livres, with an annual fiscal deficit of about 50 million livres. Although this was not an ideal financial situation, it was not dire enough to trigger a severe economic crisis. If Louis XVI had focused more on reforming the tax system and prioritizing economic development, France could have overcome this difficulty in a relatively short time given its national strength. The most crucial step was to avoid starting wars lightly, as the first shot would lead to France's bankruptcy. When Louis XVI decided to join the American War of Independence, France was destined to become deeply mired. It was akin to a person engaging in a new battle before their wounds had healed. This was the true state of the French economy at the time. By 1789, France's fiscal deficit had risen from 50 million to 160 million livres. In fact, from the recently released documents, it is clear that Louis XVI and his wife lived far from extravagantly. They could even be considered frugal compared to their predecessors. Louis XVI was renowned for his simple lifestyle. He was in the habit of meticulously recording his daily expenses, noting every expenditure, even down to the last cent. Louis XVI was very frugal even when giving jewelry to the Queen. He once used old diamonds received during his time as the Dauphin, recrafting them into a gift for his wife. He reduced royal expenditures, sold furniture and silverware, implemented free medical care for the poor, continuously donated to charities, opened the kitchens of Versailles to the poor, and encouraged his children and family to care for the needy. During the harsh winters of 1783 to 1784 and 1788 to 1789, the royal family under his leadership was consistently generous. Louis XVI spent 3 million livres on aiding the poor, while Marie and other members of the royal family contributed an additional 1 million livres from their personal funds. Louis XVI was vastly different in his personal and royal capacities. He lacked the macro perspective necessary for a king and did not know how to reform the tax system, rejuvenate the country, or develop the economy. However, as an ordinary person, he exhibited a kindness and deep sympathy for the lower classes that his predecessors could not match. When he traveled incognito and saw people suffering, he was often moved to tears. He spared no effort to help the refugees before him, but struggled to see the deep scars on the machinery of the French state. Marie Antoinette was not a queen who brought calamity to the country. On the contrary, she, like her husband, had a deep empathy for the plight of the lower classes. She adopted several peasant children, supported dozens of impoverished families, paying for the children's food and education, and sometimes bought houses and supported entire families. At her request, for the first time in history, the royal hunts were prohibited from crossing and damaging farmland. Previously, royal hunts often destroyed peasants' fields and even caused injuries or fatalities. Marie Antoinette's household had only 501 officials and servants, including just 30 ladies-in-waiting, the smallest since the establishment of the French ladies-in-waiting system in the 15th century. For comparison, Anne of Brittany had 36 ladies-in-waiting in 1491. The king's household was even smaller, with only about 400 people, compared to Louis XIV's 1,866 people. This significant reduction in servants was to save money. Most of Marie Antoinette's jewelry came from the inventory of the French crown treasure, a collection amassed by successive French kings beginning with François I. The collection was significantly enriched by the Sun King Louis XIV, who had a great love for diamonds. The royal jewelry was exclusively worn by the Queen and King. Louis XIV's queen, Marie Thérèse, was reportedly weighed down by the heavy diamonds to the point of struggling to breathe. Marie Antoinette never bought nor attempted to buy a luxurious diamond necklace. This necklace, falsely attributed to her, was originally bought by Louis XV for his mistress, Madame du Barry. Marie Antoinette also never uttered the famous phrase about the hungry peasants eating cake. This phrase originates from Rousseau's Confessions, and at the time of its publication, Marie had not yet married into France. Rousseau's original text does not specify which princess said it, and it is likely that he fabricated it. Regarding Marie's lifestyle, it never exceeded what was fitting for a queen. Marie Antoinette was the first Bourbon queen consort to significantly influence fashion. Before her, the king's official mistresses set the trends. As a fashion icon and Queen of France, Marie could not choose her attire freely. Her every move had a significant impact on the French textile industry. Marie was criticized for her attire not for being extravagant, but for not being extravagant enough. After becoming queen, Marie consistently attempted to reform court attire. The famous era of towering wigs and exaggerated panniers lasted only 10 years. In the 1780s, Marie introduced light muslin dresses, ushering in a neoclassical fashion era. However, the fabric for these dresses was imported. Marie's simple attire dealt a heavy blow to the French textile industry, resulting in severe criticism. A later queen, Empress Eugénie of France, bluntly called herself in a letter, "the principal slave of this country." Thinking about those balls makes me want to cry. Even the Sun King, Louis XIV, was forced to wear ribbons he disliked to save the French ribbon-making industry. In France, a country where the fashion industry has been a benchmark and a contributor to GDP since the 17th century, criticizing the nation's top fashion icon for spending too much on clothing is somewhat absurd. Expecting her to promote the luxury industry while criticizing her for dressing extravagantly. Even compared to other contemporary queens and empresses, Marie Antoinette's wardrobe was modest. For instance, Russian Empress Elizabeth I had 15,000 dresses, a number that Marie could not match. Marie had even fewer clothes than her mother, Empress Maria Theresa of Austria. Louis XVI did not keep any mistresses, thereby saving the French treasury a significant amount of money. Louis XVI was also the only king since Charles VII established the official mistress system who had no expenditures for mistresses. Keeping mistresses was a major expense. When later generations criticized Marie Antoinette for spending too much money, they overlooked the expenditures of Louis XIV's mistress Madame de Montespan and Louis XV's mistresses Madame de Pompadour and Madame du Barry. The Élysée Palace, the residence of the French president, is just one of the many estates owned by Madame de Pompadour. This gives an idea of how luxurious their lives were. Many reasons led to Marie Antoinette becoming the target of public criticism. As an Austrian, she was never fully accepted by the French people. When class conflicts escalated into attacks on the monarchy, people urgently sought a female scapegoat. Previously, this role was usually filled by royal mistresses, but during Louis XV's reign, Marie became the unfortunate scapegoat. During the French Revolution, the slander and shameless attacks against Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette continued for years. In a letter to her mother, Marie frankly admitted that she believed the French people were kind-hearted but misled, and that they would one day see the truth. This attitude partially explains why Louis XVI did not take effective measures to curb the slander, allowing the rumors to eventually become a major factor in driving the French Revolution. In the 1780s, the streets of Paris were filled with defamatory literature, sometimes called political pornography. Most of these works launched personal attacks against prominent members of the royal family and nobility, often with sensational accusations. Marie Antoinette was their most frequent target. After 1788, all the rumors were directed at Marie, almost entirely about the Queen's alleged chaotic private life. The rumors claimed Marie had a voracious sexual appetite, calling her the Austrian whore, alleging she was a lesbian who slept with her ladies-in-waiting, and even alleging she had sexual relations with the king's brother due to her insatiable lust. The content was extremely obscene, and they even accused Marie of incest with her own son. This latter accusation was shockingly used as one of the charges that led to her execution. These numerous slanders did not directly call for revolution, but they ultimately undermined public respect for the monarchy and the royal family's dignity. All this occurred almost without Louis XVI's awareness. When Marie Antoinette was taken to the guillotine, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot. She said at that moment, "Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." Some questioned the authenticity of this statement, as it was rumored that the executed were typically bound and gagged. However, a pencil sketch by the artist David disproves this, showing that only the Queen's hands were tied. Moreover, one of Executioner Sanson's tasks was to record the final words of notable individuals. This statement, like Madame Roland's famous last words, "Liberty, what crimes are committed in thy name?" are among the well-known final utterances of the time. Those who wish to wear the crown must bear its weight. It cannot be denied that since Marie Antoinette enjoyed the honors of being a queen, it was fitting that she paid the price when the dynasty fell. After all the gifts of fate have a hidden price.